Good morning, History 1700 students. Today is day 2.2. This is your instructional video for today. I'm first going to start out with some housekeeping stuff. There's been a little bit of confusion because on the syllabus it said the peer review would be today, July 1st. Seeing as how class is going and the fact that it's online, I will give you till Friday to get your peer review and your rough draft in. Remember to peer review the person's paper whom you've been assigned. Share your papers with your peer reviewer and go through it. Give me comments as you go. Punctuation, grammar, spelling stuff, sentences that are awkward, stuff that is missing, those kind of things. But then at the end, make sure you're printing off and handwriting your responses to the peer review or typing right into the document, whichever. And just make sure you submit the peer review form that you've completed on somebody else's paper and submit it to Canvas by Friday night. And by the same token, please submit the rough draft that you got to the rough draft assignment link, and I will go over and I'll skim it and quickly give you some feedback on how you can make it better. But hearing from two people of how you can make your paper better should help you, and your final project should be a little better than it would have been if you hadn't have done the peer review. So I will furiously grade your stuff from last week, today and tomorrow, and get it graded before you turn your next batch in. That is my promise and my pledge this whole semester, to get your stuff graded before you turn in the next batch. And that's it as far as that goes. Today or tomorrow, I'll try to splice together the Google Meet that we did yesterday. I videotaped the second Google Meet. I should have videotaped the first one because the first one was more smooth, but the second one we had a little bit of internet problems for a few minutes. But we'll do our best if any of you want to see that who missed it. So today we're talking about the 1790s, so the years right after the Constitution was ratified. And these were very important years in the fact that it would set the precedent on how the government would work. So this is why I spent a lot of time on a day on the 1790s, because it established the routines of our government. And first of all, I want to talk, and what I'm talking about, my talking points are in a document that I will email you along with this link to this video. So never fear, you'll be able to see where I'm getting my stuff. It's just to keep me on track and make sure I'm covering the points that I want to. First thing was George Washington, father of his country, as he is known. And I would say he was the great unifier because he was basically unanimously elected as president in 1789 and took office. And one of the things that they debated on is what to call him. And John Adams wanted to call him something like His Excellency or His Highness, the Presidency of the United States. And I thought, no, that's not going to work because that's a little too much like where we came from and what we want to avoid. We want to avoid having a king, and that sounds like he is a king with that title. And so George Washington took on calling himself Mr. President, and that is what stuck. And we've called the president Mr. President ever since. And George Washington, tried to be a man of people, but one of the things that I like to point out is he still chose to ride in town with a grand carriage pulled by 6 horses and escorted by uniformed liverymen. So that's not really a man of the people if he's doing that, but he tried. Okay, tried. He strived to adhere to the Constitution and refused the veto power, except for when he felt Congress acted unconstitutionally. And it's important to note that the specific powers of the Supreme Court to overturn anything was unconstitutional, hadn't been established yet. That would be established in 1803 with Marbury versus Madison. But anyway, he had a cabinet, which became known his closest advisors. Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. First Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. You all heard of him probably because of the musical. Henry Knox was Secretary of War. Now that is called Secretary of Defense. And the first Supreme Court Chief Justice was John Jay. And George Washington really wanted to unite the nation, and he was a good choice. Obviously, like I said, I call him the great unifier. Let's see, judicial system, just real quick. States maintained individual bodies of law, wanting to preserve local autonomy. Federal courts were appeals bodies, establishing a federal court system of judicial review of state legislation. Like I said, constitutionality, the review of constitutionality wouldn't be established until 1803. Hamilton, as first Secretary of Treasury, had a balancing act. There's still a lot of Revolutionary War debt, and wanted to make the nation, solvent financially. Wanted to make it so both domestic and foreign investors would want to invest in the nation, and so he established a system where he would sell bonds, to investors. So he could, better pay back the debt. He created the Bank of the United States, and a public corporation funded by private capital, which would serve as the depository for government funds. One of the big controversies was where to place the nation's capital, and excuse me. And it became the location was on the Potomac River between Virginia and Maryland, and that was debated along with some tariffs and whiskey, and it was all the location of the capital was part of that system that was controversy that was decided upon because of that. Let's see, Hamilton, very important to note, as I mentioned last time in the Google Meet. Hamilton was a loose constructionist, as the Constitution goes, kind of the spirit of the law, while Jefferson was a strict constructionist, meaning, hey, if the Constitution doesn't say it, we can't do it. And that right there, that debate over constitutionality, constitutional leanings, I guess you could say, was the impetus for political parties. George Washington himself hoped for a nation without political parties. But that didn't work. And as soon as he was out of office in 1796, that was the first partisan election of our nation between Jefferson, known as the Republican or Democratic Republican, and Adams, the Federalist. Again, the Federalists were the pro-central government group. Let's see. Moving down here. But yeah. Hamilton's fiscal program, especially with those bonds, establishing the Bank of the United States, again, established finally a national currency, helped restore the financial health of the United States, and foreign investment in government securities increased, and so domestic capital provided the Bank of the United States with good reserves. Foreign affairs were a big deal, and this is one thing that fractured Federalists and Democratic Republicans as well, was, Federalists favored better relations with Britain. The Anti-Federalists favored better relations with France. Hey, France had helped us win the war. And when the French Revolution started, 1789, Jefferson was like, yes, we've inspired more people to, we've inspired other revolutions that might be better for the public good. And that divided public opinion. Hey, should we be more with the British? Should we be more with the French? Just a note, in the 1790s, and no joke, the Indian Intercourse Act, became the only legal way to obtain Indian lands, and usually after a military defeat for the Indians, and that set the precedent of how the United States would take Indian lands. That's important to know. Jay and Pinckney's treaties important because the Jay Treaty was trying to resolve some disputes with the British in the wake and aftermath of the Revolutionary War, and then the Pinckney Treaty wanted to open up some shipping, especially on the Mississippi River. It was this treaty with Spain, and the battle over these treaties and foreign policy really made Washington more a controversial figure for the first time, and made people in the press criticize him in public, and so that was kind of the beginning of the end of Washington. This debate over these two treaties. One couldn't have been passed without the other, and then like I mentioned before, kind of got ahead of myself. Hamilton's supporters started to become Federalists. Okay, the Federalists favored close ties with Britain and advocated a strong central government, while Thomas Jefferson and his supporters became known as Republicans or Democratic Republicans, different than the Republican Party today. Republicans were more sympathetic with France, and Republicans wanted more self-government, government by the people, not strong central government. So that was a big fracture. Those two issues. So, election of 1796, like I said, first partisan election. John Adams narrowly won because he was considered a statesman, kind of above party. And in that day, the runner-up in the election became the vice president. So here we got John Adams, a Federalist, Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republican, in close ties with each other. And it made for some messy politics. And it's important to note that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were friends. They were diplomats in Europe for a while, and they had a close friendship. But then, with all this hullabaloo over politics in the 1790s, it totally fractured, and they became political enemies. The Adams presidency, history hasn't been that kind to John Adams up until just the last 30 to 40 years. France was a problem, and people wanted to make war with France. They were what was called impressing American sailors. They were taking over American ships, flying the French flag on them. One thing that was interesting, the XYZ affair. These French envoys, diplomats, nicknamed X, Y, and Z, said that the U.S. had to pay bribes to them before they would even start diplomatic relations, and the communication saying that became public and was published, became known as the XYZ affair, and that's actually one thing that made John Adams look good. But again, people were pressing John Adams to go to war with France because of all of this. But he said, no way. We can ill afford a war. Diplomacy, I guess you could say, it was the only way to go about it, and that's what he tried. One of the things, the major black mark on John Adams' presidency is the Alien and Sedition Acts, and because of what was going on in France, that's what came through. Basically, the Alien and Sedition Acts severely limited the freedoms of speech and press, and anybody coming out very vocally against the government could be arrested. Okay, and the time for which people, recent immigrants, could become citizens was turned from 5 to 14 years. That was aimed at recent French immigrants. Excuse me, those kind of things. But the main one was the Sedition Act, which severely limited those freedoms, and that hurt Adams. He wasn't gung ho on this. His Federalist allies said, "Hey, we should do this." Abigail, his wife, was all over it, and so Abigail was honestly his most trusted political advisor, and so he signed it into law, and that was a big knock on his reputation, because they said, "Hey, he is curtailing the very freedoms that he stood for as one of the major founding fathers." Let's see, election of 1800. Okay, after that, black mark, he wouldn't go to war with France. The Union Sedition Acts, that severely hurt Adams. He goes. The election of 1800 was Adams against Jefferson again, and Alexander Hamilton, like a month before the election, comes out with a scathing indictment on Adams, saying he's a madman, and that really hurts too. So Jefferson obviously won that election, and it was that election. The outcome of that election is actually a win when you look at it, because it showed that this grand experiment in democracy we talked about in our Google Meet yesterday actually worked, because the opposition party candidate was the incumbent, lost. The new candidate, political rivals came in. No strife, no gunfire, no coup attempt. It was a smooth transition, and that right there showed that this government worked. For a little while, I haven't had this video that I like to show about John Adams' presidency, and I actually found that again. I'll provide a link to that in this email. I also will provide a link. Well, I will attach this document that I'm getting this all from, just so you have it for your review. But one of the things that I want to note here at the very end is John Adams was obviously part of the founding father group, but he felt like he was going to play second fiddle to the likes of Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. He was very keenly aware that, hey, they are going to have statues erected to them, he said, but where am I going to be? Where am I going to fall? Where's my place in history going to be? And he was, the founding fathers knew that they could shape their historical legacy during their lifetimes, and John Adams was no different. And he felt like he was going to, be on the more of a bottom rung compared to his other padres, and so that was an obsession of his throughout his lifetime. But like I said at the beginning, history has been kind to him. Biography by David McCullough came out, 20, 30 years ago. There's been some miniseries on HBO. There's been this video that I'm going to show you, and John Adams is looked at in more of a positive light, kind of historiography in action there. And then my final thing, kind of a gee whiz thing that I love to mention, and is pretty coincidental, is that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, again, like I said, first friends, then bitter political enemies, and then thankfully through correspondence and letters they reconciled at the end of their lives. About 1809 they started a great correspondence. Never saw each other again, but had a great correspondence through letters, and obviously made up to each other, were friends distantly until the end of their lives. And the end of their lives came on the exact same day, which I don't think is coincidence, but and that day was July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years from the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Adams was like in his late 80s. Jefferson was in his mid 70s, if I remember right. But John Adams' last words were, "Jefferson still lives." But in fact, he was wrong, because Jefferson died at noon that day, and John Adams died at 4 o'clock. But how would he know that? So that's a great story about our founding fathers. I just love that these two were bitter political rivals, and then ended their lives, started great correspondence. And if you read the David McCullough biography, it's great in talking about that correspondence. That's one of my favorite parts of the book. So, anyway, that is the instructional video for today. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. I will grade your stuff here in the next 2 days, and hope things are going well for you. Hope the peer reviews go well for you, and remember to submit your rough draft and your peer reviews to Canvas by Friday, as well as your regular short answer and discussion board stuff. So thank you. Signing off for another day. Bye bye.